Abe's failure did nothing to diminish Admiral Kondo's resolve to land troops and supplies on Guadalcanal. His cruisers and destroyers stationed off the coral reefs of Oman, Java, about 250 miles to the north, were urgently called into action. At 6:30 on November 13th, Vice Admiral Mawa Intoe set out from the Shortlands with 4 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 destroyers to bombard Henderson Field. This left Rear Admiral Tanaka with 11 destroyers to escort 11 troop-laden transports to Guadalcanal. Tanaka's reinforcement group, which had departed from the Shortlands on the night of November 12th, prudently retired to its base early on the 13th and planned to make a run to Guadalcanal to discharge troops after sunset on the 14th. In preparation for this, Admiral Kondo's main force would integrate the undamaged remnants of Abe's raiding group, including Kirishima, Nagara, and 4 destroyers to clear the way for the Emperor's transports. Air cover was to be provided by 2 carriers, supported by 2 Kondo-class battleships and the cruiser Tone. Despite a rough night, American prospects seemed promising on the morning of the 13th. Henderson Field still had a strong presence of aircraft. Admiral Kinkaid's Task Force 16, with the carrier Enterprise and 2 new battleships that had left New Caledonia on the 11th, was steaming up from the south. The Enterprise was busy with repairs, but its forward elevator was still out of commission. Cruisers Pensacola and destroyers Gwyn and Preston, detached from Kagan's command before the night action, were en route from the Solomons to bolster Kinkaid's screen. Admiral Turner had dismissed a contact report of 2 enemy carriers 150 miles west of Lunda on November 12 at 1450, but Admiral Kinkaid could not afford to ignore it. Knowing the threat posed by carrier planes, Kinkaid, at dawn on November 13th, ordered Task Force 16 to search 200 miles out over a 120-degree northerly sector. An attack group was prepared on the Enterprise's flight deck, but the scouting planes found nothing. Junio and Hio were well beyond their range. Kinkaid then decided to use some of Enterprise's aircraft for Henderson Field. 9 Avengers and 6 Wildcats were sent out with orders to report to General Vander after searching for enemy ships and attacking any they found. The first target encountered was the wounded battleship High, with Lieutenant John F. Sutherland leading the torpedo bombers. The Avengers made 2 hits, one of which disabled the rudder, but the resilient battleship needed more damage to be put out of action. Sutherland's planes, having returned to Henderson Field, took off again at 1330, accompanied by 8 Marine Corps SPDs and 2 Wildcats. This time, Avengers launched torpedoes at the nearly stationary battleship, with 2 hits causing significant damage but not sinking it. At 1430, other planes arrived from Espiritu Santo. 14 flying fortresses dropped 56 bombs, with only 1 possibly hitting. The High, having sustained severe damage, was left dead in the water, allowing other aircraft to continue their attack. Admiral Fite's land-based aircraft from Espiritu Santo were active on November 13th. Scout planes encountered numerous engagements, and B-17s reported Tanaka's group, which had been delayed by Kagan's night action. Navy Catalinas also had skirmishes and sighted enemy ships, but Enterprise's excitement was brief. A 4-engine Kawanishi was shot down by her combat air patrol, but it seems the Japanese were too busy to act on its report. Admiral Hyde from Numia had instructed Admiral Kinkaid to cover the retirement of American ships damaged in the night action by remaining south of latitude 11 degrees 40 south of the equator. However, information on enemy movements that came in during the day indicated more urgent tasks. By mid-afternoon, Hawley ordered Lee's heavy gunfire component of Task Force 16 to be ready for a quick run to Guadalcanal. Hawley had decided to keep Enterprise south of Guadalcanal, so it was up to the battleships. At about 17 o'clock on November 13th, Kinkaid directed his entire task force north to close on Guadalcanal at 23 knots. An hour and a half later, during the second dog watch, Hawley ordered Lee's group ahead to prevent a bombardment of Henderson Field. Unfortunately, Kinkaid's advance had been delayed by emergency maneuvers to avoid submarines and by flight operations, and by the time Hawley's order reached the task force, it was still 350 miles from Savo Island. No battleship could make it there that night. Kinkaid sent the destroyer Mustin 50 miles east to inform Hawley that Lee could not reach Savo before November 14th. Consequently, poor coordination at Nooney meant there was nothing to prevent the Japanese bombardment ships from attacking Henderson Field, except for the Tulagi motor torpedo boats. Admiral Ma's cruisers and destroyers arrived off Savo Island shortly after midnight, having taken a longer route north of Schweitzer and Santa Isabel to avoid detection. Ma detached Nishimura's bombardment group to enter the Sound while he patrolled westward to prevent interference. Nishimura's flagship, Suzuya, along with another heavy cruiser, Mir, each carrying about 500 rounds of 8-inch shells, and covered by the light cruiser Tenru and 4 destroyers, approached Guadalcanal. They bombarded Henderson Field, where aviators and ground crews were hosting survivors from the Atlanta and the sunk destroyers, Sleepy and E&D. For 37 minutes, Japanese shells rained down, creating chaos among the defenders who could do little but curse and pray. Despite the barrage, losses were less than anticipated. 1 dive bomber and 17 fighter planes were destroyed, with 32 more fighters damaged, but the field remained operational. Nishimura's bombardment was underwhelming compared to previous actions, and 2 motor torpedo boats from Tulagi made several runs at the heavy cruisers but scored no hits. At 25 on November 14th, having expended his ammunition, Nishimura led his ships around the north end of Savo and retreated with Ma's patrol group toward the Shortlands. On the morning of Friday, the 13th, there was hope that Kak's sacrifice had halted the enemy's advance. However, it was a shock to learn that heavy Japanese surface forces had broken through and were shelling Henderson Field. The situation worsened when it was reported that Japanese transports were moving down the slot unopposed by surface forces. Even President Roosevelt began to consider the possibility of evacuating Guadalcanal. The tension felt at that moment, recalled Secretary Forrestal, was only matched by the anxiety that had gripped Washington the night before the Normandy landing. As the sun rose over the Sear Channel, airmen and ground crews at Henderson Field emerged from their foxholes. Reinforcements from the Enterprise, missing their regular Navy meals, shared a sparse breakfast with Army aviators, Marines, and Navy survivors. Henderson Field prepared for one of its busiest days in history. Search planes from Henderson and Espiritu Santo were already scouring the waters by daybreak. Shortly after 7 o'clock a.m., reports began to come in. 2 large groups of combatant ships and transports were moving up the slot, 150 miles northwest of Henderson Field, headed southeast. Ma's retiring support group, bearing west by north and about 140 miles away, was also detected. 6 Avengers, 7 Dauntlesses, and 7 fighters took to the air, targeting the nearer contingent. They found and attacked the Japanese cruisers Kinugasa and Isuzu. The Avengers' torpedo planes and the dive bombers inflicted significant damage, with the Kinugasa catching fire and the Isuzu emitting smoke. All American aircraft returned safely to base by 10:15 a.m., marking a successful morning. The Enterprise, 200 miles south-southwest of Guadalcanal, was eager to join the fight, but was delayed by bad weather. By 6:08 a.m., 2 planes were launched to cover a northwesterly sector 200 miles out, and 8 planes covered a northerly sector 250 miles out. At 7:08 a.m., a search plane reported 10 unidentified aircraft 140 miles north, heading toward the Enterprise. Though the identity of these planes was never confirmed, Captain Hardison ordered an attack group to head north to investigate. This early departure proved advantageous when a contact report came through. 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 possible converted carrier, and 4 destroyers were located at 8 degrees 45 S, 157 degrees 10 E, moving southward. The 2 search planes that made the report engaged the Kinugasa, causing flooding and a 10-degree list. By 9:50 a.m., The disorganized Japanese force came into view, and the bomber leader selected cruiser targets. The resulting attacks inflicted 2 hits on the Kinugasa, which eventually sank. Admiral Ma, whether intentionally or not, served as a decoy, drawing American air power away from the troop ships. Over 2 hours of attacks, the Japanese lost the Kinugasa and suffered damage to other ships, including the Choi, Maya, Isuzu, and Michio. Despite this, the crippled and undamaged ships reached Shortland safely. Admiral Tanaka's heavily escorted reinforcement group was spotted at 7:00 a.m. and identified at 7:30 a.m. by Henderson scout planes. It wasn't until an hour later that 2 Enterprise SBD pilots found the ships midway between New Georgia and Santa Isabel. They targeted the transport, scoring 1 near miss and 1 probable hit. As they exited, they faced intense enemy fire, with 1 SBD shot down and the other barely making it back to the Enterprise after nearly 5.5 hours airborne. Guadalcanal-based aircraft then focused on the approaching transports near Savo Island. A mixed group of Marine and Navy planes, 7 torpedo bombers, 18 dive bombers, and 12 fighters, rose from the bomb-scared runways and attacked Tanaka's convoy at 11:50 a.m. They inflicted significant damage on several transport hulls. At 12:45 p.m., another wave of 17 dive bombers and fighters targeted the transports, dropping bombs from 12,000 feet and causing at least 1 ship to break in 2. 15 flying fortresses from Espiritu Santo began their mission at 10:18 a.m. and attacked at 2:30 p.m., releasing 15 tons of bombs over the transports. They scored 1 hit and several near misses. Aerial combat ensued with the enemy, resulting in 6 Japanese planes being shot down. Henderson Field was hectic that afternoon, with high cumulus clouds and shell-torn coconut palms providing skid relief. Ground crewmen worked frantically and pilots returned with scorched landing gear. The excitement was palpable as the long-awaited opportunity to strike at the Japanese transports arrived. Wounded sailors and casualties from the sunken ships awaited evacuation, watching each aircraft depart and praying for its success. At 12:45 p.m., another group of Navy and Marine dive bombers attacked the transports at Lunga Point. An hour later, disregarding enemy anti-aircraft fire, they added to the chaos among the broken transports. Another wave of 10 bombers followed. Admiral Kincaid made the decision to deploy all available forces. The Enterprise launched 8 bombers, 12 fighters, and was led by Skipper Flatley of Fighter 10. By 1:30 p.m., Flatley spotted Tanaka's disordered ship 60 miles northwest of Savo Island. By 3:30 p.m., Tanaka was attempting to reorganize his ships. Several transports and destroyers were turning southeast, leaving others on fire and dead in the water. The reduced number of Zeeks, now hesitant to engage, provided little resistance. The American planes targeted the transports, resulting in significant damage. All Enterprise planes returned safely to Henderson Field by 4:00 p.m. Tanaka faced a dilemma. Retreating would mean failure and loss of face, but continuing could risk losing his remaining ships. Opting for a bold move, he transferred between 600 and 1,000 men to the still navigable transports and persisted with the advance. Lieutenant Commander Thomas, leading a 7-plane flight without fighter escort, departed Henderson Field at 3:30 p.m. The unprotected SBDs faced fierce resistance from Zeeks, with 3 SBDs shot down and 2 others seriously damaged. Despite this, 1 plane managed to evade capture, disappearing into the clouds and the jungles of the Russell Islands. Finally shaking off his attackers, the pilot returned to base with 68 holes in his Dauntless and a strong belief in the importance of fighter protection. 2 more Marine fighters were dispatched from Henderson Field before nightfall. On November 14th, the Japanese lost 7 transports and a heavy cruiser to American air attacks, with significant damage inflicted on other vessels. The cost to the Americans was only 5 planes. Both sides learned valuable lessons. The Japanese realized that a destroyer screen and fighter cover were insufficient for protecting lightly armed ships and that they needed additional airfields for better protection. The Americans observed the increased effectiveness of carrier planes when supported by a land base. These airstrikes obscured the activities of Lee's heavy gunfire group and Kondo's emergency bombardment group, both of which had critical missions. Task Force 64, under Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Lee, was tasked with intercepting and engaging the enemy. Lee was known for his exceptional strategic mind, technical knowledge, and calm under pressure, qualities that would be crucial in the upcoming battle. On the evening of November 13th, Lee's group, consisting of 2 battleships and 4 destroyers, was unable to reach Savo in time to thwart Nishimura's cruiser bombardment. The following day, Lee positioned his forces south of Guadalcanal, hoping to avoid detection. Despite enemy snoopers, Lee was able to gather intelligence on enemy movements. He confirmed the presence of enemy battleships heading southbound, confirming suspicions of a Tokyo Express run that night. At around 1:00 p.m. on November 14th, Admiral Kondo's bombardment group, including the battleship Kirishima, heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, light cruisers, and a destroyer squadron, moved south from its standby position near Onang, Java. The group was attacked by the U.S. submarine Trout, which narrowly missed a destroyer and nearly struck the flagship. This incident led Kondo to expect a warm reception off Lunga Point. Lee's task force, consisting of destroyers Benham, Preston, and Gwin, along with battleships Washington and South Dakota, made its approach with cautious optimism. Lee had not had time to prepare a formal operation order, so he communicated his plans via visual dispatch. Despite doubts about committing new battleships to the restricted waters around Savo Island, Admiral Hawley authorized Lee to act with complete freedom. On the night of November 14th, Lee's task force maneuvered around the western end of Guadalcanal, observing the distant flares from Tanaka's burning transports. At 21:00, Lee changed course to head into Iron Bottom Sound, aiming to intercept the enemy bombardment group before dealing with the covering forces. By 21:48, the course was adjusted to 150 degrees southeast and Lee's ship steamed over the wrecks of previous battles. The water was calm and low clouds occasionally obscured the moon, casting dark shadows. Lee attempted to contact Guadalcanal for updated intelligence, but faced communication issues as he had not been assigned a radio call sign. At 22:30, Lee intercepted chatter from 3 motor torpedo boats patrolling northeast of Savo. Recognizing the need for clarity, he signaled Guadalcanal headquarters for more information. The PT boats, recognizing Lee, confirmed they were not targeting him, and Lee learned that the Japanese were advancing in force but had no additional details. Admiral Kondo's force included a distant screen with light cruiser Sendai and 3 destroyers, a close screen with light cruiser Nagara and 6 destroyers, and the main bombardment group consisting of the heavy cruisers Asago, Takao, and battleship Kirishima. Kondo's bombardment was timed to coincide with the landing of reinforcement troops from Tanaka's remnants, including the 4 remaining transports and accompanying destroyers. As the Japanese approached, Lee prepared for the upcoming engagement, aware that the outcome of this night battle could significantly impact the campaign for Guadalcanal. When Admiral Kondo received reports of 2 enemy cruisers and 4 destroyers north of Savo Island heading into Iron Bottom Sound, he took decisive action. Destroyers Ayanami and Uranami were dispatched south of Savo, moving west of the island, while Sendai and Shikinami, unknown to Admiral Lee, pursued Lee's forces. Kondo divided his forces into multiple elements, with cruiser Nagara and 4 destroyers forming the advance guard and Asumo and Teruzuki remaining with the main bombardment group. Kondo's tactical plan involved dispersing his forces across a 10-mile square area, a strategy that exemplified Japanese tactical dispersion. At 22:52, as the moon set behind Cape Esperance, Admiral Lee's force executed the column movement to the west. Washington's radar picked up a target 9 miles distant, identified as the cruiser Sendai. Lee ordered his captains to open fire, and 16-inch projectiles from Washington began targeting Sendai. Sendai laid down a smoke screen and withdrew, accompanied by destroyer Shikinami. Despite this engagement, the American destroyers did not relax their vigilance. Destroyers Ayanami and Uranami, sneaking along the south shore of Savo, came into visual range. The American destroyers, Walker, Benham, Preston, and Gwyn, engaged with rapid gunfire and torpedoes. At 23:30, Ayanami and Uranami launched torpedoes at the American destroyers. Walker was hit by enemy shells and began to fall off, while Benham continued firing but avoided launching torpedoes. Preston, having suffered severe damage, was soon out of action. Gwyn, also damaged, continued to engage the enemy as long as possible. The American battleships, Washington and South Dakota, tried to assist but faced their own challenges. Washington had trouble sorting targets on her radar, while South Dakota experienced a power failure, losing electrical power and radar capability. By 23:35, all four American destroyers were out of action. Walker was sinking fast, Benham was partially destroyed, and Preston was sinking. Gwyn managed to pass through the water, continuing to fire at the enemy. At 23:35, Admiral Lee changed course to avoid the burning destroyers, while South Dakota, after regaining power, continued to engage enemy targets. Lee recognized the destroyers were no longer capable of offensive action and ordered them to retire. South Dakota also faced further challenges as fires erupted on her fantail, but were eventually extinguished. By 0:20 on November 15, Lee altered his course to the north and left the damaged destroyers behind. Washington proceeded alone as Kirishima, and the rest of the Japanese bombardment group were left behind. The battle showcased the chaotic and intense nature of naval combat in Iron Bottom Sound, with both sides learning and adapting from their experiences. The aftermath of the Battle of Guadalcanal was marked by significant developments and reflections on the engagements of November 14 to 15, 1942. The first sight for spectators was a Japanese transport, Yamatsuki Maru, beaching itself on Guadalcanal. Three other transports, Kinugawa Maru, Hirakawa Maru, and Yara Maru, were already grounded. Army fighters, followed by Navy and Marine bombers from the Enterprise, began attacking the transports at 6:45 a.m. and continued until 3:30 p.m. About 17 bombers from Enterprise struck the transports, causing severe damage and igniting an ammunition dump that burned throughout the day and night. Meanwhile, a U.S. destroyer, the USS Meade, distinguished itself by opening fire from 12,500 yards on a Japanese ship in Doma Cove. After closing to 8,000 yards, the Meade continued its bombardment, sinking several transports and damaging Japanese-held beaches with its 40mm machine guns and main battery. The Meade then assisted in rescuing survivors, including 135 men from the USS Walker and 131 from the USS Preston. Among the survivors was Seaman Dale E. Land and machinist's mate Harold Taylor, who survived for 2 days and nights in the water. They eventually reached Guadalcanal and endured a grueling journey through the jungle, surviving on coconuts and supplies. Taylor was killed in an encounter with Japanese troops, while Land was rescued after making it to American lines with a high fever. By the end of November 15, the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal concluded. Both sides claimed victory, but the results were clear. Admiral Turner's forces successfully landed almost all of their troops and material, while Admiral Tanaka managed to land only about 2,000 survivors, 260 cases of ammunition, and 1,500 bags of rice. The Americans maintained control of Henderson Field and dominated the air, while the Japanese lost 2 battleships and 11 transports, which was a severe blow they could not easily recover from. The Battle of Guadalcanal was decisive not only for the island but for the broader Pacific War. The U.S. Navy demonstrated significant improvement, shifting from defense to offense, while the Japanese began to retreat. This battle marked a turning point, with the United States gaining momentum and confidence, and the Allies' fortunes improving globally. President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill recognized the significance of this shift, with Roosevelt declaring the war's turning point had been reached and Churchill announcing the end of the beginning. The Japanese admitted the battle's critical role in determining the war's outcome. From November 15, 1942 to August 15, 1945, the war followed the path to Allied victory. The Battle of Guadalcanal, which raged from November 13 to 15, 1942, marked a critical turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II. The United States achieved a strategic victory by successfully defending Guadalcanal and preventing Japanese reinforcements and supplies from reaching the island. This victory was pivotal in halting Japanese expansion and secured the island as a key Allied base. The battle inflicted severe losses on the Japanese, including the destruction of 2 battleships and 11 transports. These losses, coupled with the inability to replace lost naval and air assets, significantly weakened Japanese capabilities and their ability to project power in the Pacific. In contrast, the United States demonstrated improved tactical coordination, effective radar use, and enhanced night fighting strategies. The successful defense of Guadalcanal bolstered Allied morale and signaled the shift from a defensive to an offensive posture in the Pacific. It also highlighted the importance of combined arms and joint operations, showing how effective coordination between naval, air, and ground forces could turn the tide of battle. The battle exposed Japanese operational failures, including poor coordination and the inability to effectively support ground operations. These mistakes underscored the challenges Japan faced as it struggled to maintain its military operations in the Pacific. Overall, the Battle of Guadalcanal was a decisive engagement that shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the Allies. It marked the beginning of a series of victories that would lead to Japan's eventual defeat, underscoring the growing strength and effectiveness of